Okay, it's 12:30. Thank you everyone for being here so promptly. I'll call the meeting to order and I'll look to see if there are any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Okay, seeing none, let's move on to the election of the vice chair for the term ending November 30th, 2018. I see Councillor Zafman. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to put forward Councillor Morgan for consideration if he'd be interested in serving for the year.
Councillor Morgan, are you interested in that? Okay. Is there a seconder for that? Okay. Are there any other nominees? Okay, seeing none, let's have that moved and seconded and then we'll have a vote. Okay, that motion's up. Let's open the vote.
Motion carries 6-0.
All right, congratulations, Councillor Morgan. I'm looking at the consent items, 3, 4, 5, 6. Would anyone like to pull those items? Councillor Van Holst?
I'd be interested in asking questions about 4 and 6.
But not in pulling them. Just ask questions.
I don't plan to vote against them. I'm looking for clarity on a couple of these items.
Great, let's leave them all
Mind
together. Anyone else want to pull anything? 4? Okay. Other committee members? No? Okay, so let's get a motion up for 3, 5, and 6, and then we'll take questions and discussion on those items. Sorry, I want to do everything except 4. 4 is, that's okay. Okay, while we're just fixing that, perhaps we can start the discussion on 3, 5, and 6. I see Deputy Mayor Hubert. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll try not to be too disruptive from over on this side of the fence, but just a question on the item number 3, particularly with respect to T block. Could someone just tell us what the level of occupancy is in that building at this time? And quite frankly, I'm not sure the caveat of our community loans and grants program will be all that helpful when you look at moving an organization. Which ones are there, what the level of occupancy is. I'll start with that, Mr. Chair.
Who would like to speak now? Annalisa, go ahead.
Through the chair. So currently, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's about 8 organizations that are currently housed within T-Block. They've been there for some time. So one of the things that we certainly anticipated that this would be a very slow process to ensure that we support them through any potential move. Should council wish to proceed with looking at us investigating options, we would have to work closely with them. One of the things we identified is they have been long-term tenants. They pay very little, so we anticipate that there will be some potential financial hardships. So there are other options that we would also investigate, whether there are other community centers, co-location options. The community grants process is another option that's available. So that is something that when we look at investigating options, we would look at all of those and work with them to see what would be feasible to be able to proceed. And certainly something we anticipate would take some time to do and would not be done over an immediate action.
Okay. Do you know what percentage of the building they're actually using? I believe it's 4 stories or 3 stories. I can't remember exactly what the footprint is of it in terms of each floor.
Through the chair, it's a 3-story building. I think there's a large portion of the building that is currently utilized. So it's not a huge building, but certainly the space is being well utilized by the occupants that are there.
And I'm not going to look for these numbers today, but certainly when it comes back, I'd like to know what we've invested in that building in the last number of years. I know I remember us doing some significant upgrades in windows and whatnot over the last 5 years. If you have the numbers, I'd be interested. She has the numbers, Mr. Chair, so that'd be great.
Through the chair, so since 2009, we've spent over $700,000 on the building. Certainly, we anticipate additional life cycle costs going well into the future. Right now, the life cycle costs are about $1.1 million. So we actually have, we're looking at that right now. There is an assessment of that building currently taking place to update our life cycle costs. So that is certainly something that should the committee or council recommend to maintain the building, we would have to look at our future plans to ensure that we have adequate funding going in to support that building well into the future.
Sorry, I'm embarrassed to say I like just this information. And I am embarrassed to say this. I don't know where Park Farm is, and I don't know where Batty House is. And would someone please help me with that?
It looks like our former Managing Director of Recreation and Parks would like to jump in. Go ahead, Mr. Coxhead.
The Park Farm is immediately adjacent to Citywide Sports Park. It's the former Harrison Fraser estate, as I recall.
And Batty House?
And now I remember actually being there, and I've forgotten that. And Batty House?
We believe it's in and around the Palm Mills area, so I have to look up the addresses for where they all are, but yeah, they're small buildings scattered throughout the city.
Councillor Morgan and myself and the mayor have been participants in the Oak Ridge Optimist Trivia Night. I think there's a really good couple questions in here for that one. Thank you for your answers.
Okay, I have Councillor Zafman and then Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, thanks to staff for this ongoing updates on some of the asset reviews that we're doing here. Very helpful and nice to see that we've finally identified at least a couple assets and one specifically with the T block that we can maybe look at finding maybe better opportunities to utilize that building, whether that be with the city or outside of the city's hands at some point. Just curious though, talk a lot about under Appendix C, a number of these assets that are sort of going to be looked at as a further review. This is just the preliminary review. Do you have a timeline of when some of these assets might be coming back for council's consideration?
So through the chair, on page 3, we have some of them that we've kind of identified a bit of a timeline in terms of what we're going through. So I think systematically, we're looking at some of them on a very defined time basis, depending on the ones that we can move forward with versus the ones that we need some additional support to look at. So specifically, some of the bigger ones, we're looking to link in with our ongoing deep dive and continued service review process because they're a lot more challenging and a lot more work to take a look at to identify what the options are. So some of that is we're actually looking concurrently at putting out an RFP to continue forward the service review process. So we're working on those timelines right now to bring that forward. And I mean, our hope is that we would have some, and we're looking at a prioritization. So the hope is right now that by the end of the year, we would have 2 that are detailed and completed, but certainly that'll rely on some of the RFP and the consultant work that we get back and our response to an RFP that we put out.
Just to clarify, you mean the end of 2018 or 2017?
Sorry, the end of 2018.
Thank you. And through the chair again, just to follow up, could you just clarify a little bit? I'm not sure if I had heard of this RFP before and what exactly it's going to be looking at and maybe why not. I mean, obviously we've done a bit of this internally up until this point, so the reason maybe why we're moving off from that.
So through the chair, part of what we've done up until now, if you recall the service review report that we brought in September, that spoke about some of the deep dive process that we would be looking at. That is what we're referring, is to go to that more in-depth level. So we're looking at that process. So the RFP would be in response specifically to the very deep dive and picking a couple of the services and getting a framework with which we would move forward to evaluate some of the more complex operations to move forward with. So that's what that RFP is in response, and is to continually move forward our service review process.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I apologize. I'm afraid that I made notes on the front page of this and also inside, and I didn't realize that I did want to make a slight change in number 3. So I might have to ask to pull that. But the change I'd hope to make was on page 6, just add another bullet to the guiding principles, which would fit in with our our strategic plan, and have number 6B has the potential to generate revenue for the city as another thing to look at when the assets are reviewed. And I think if I move that, Councillor Morgan might second that.
Okay, why don't we just back out moving and seconding? We'll get 3 pulled out and we'll continue on with the discussion about 3. And then we'll move on to 5 and 6. Councillor Morgan.
Can I have your mic? So I'm not adverse to what Councillor Van Holst said, but I would like to hear from our staff on what they think about that and whether it's incorporated into some of the other components of the asset review already. If it's not, certainly I think it's a reasonable thing to consider adding. My question, if I get an answer to that, as well as a comment on, I know that in the Appendix C, the Housing Development Corporation and the London Middlesex Housing Corporation, it's really described as a limited benefit to reviewing those assets, given they both have their own individual mandates to do so. But I wonder if there's a role for the city to play and support in those two organizations working together to rationalize their assets, as in we know LMHC has an aging stock. Housing Development Corporation is a partner that has the potential to assist them in the redevelopment of some of that stock in some way. I know that they both talked about it publicly at meetings in these chambers. And so I know it's not on our asset review, but it's probably still, you know, there may still be a role for the city to play in assisting in the review of those assets, so that between those two organizations and their boards as well, since we're the sole shareholder of both.
Through the chair, that is something that we did contemplate, and through our discussions with specifically HTC, that is some of the conversations that we have had. So we know they're tasked with doing that. And obviously LMHC is looking at their housing stock and regeneration. So we are open to having those conversations and continue to have those conversations with them. And certainly as they look at, I mean, we know that they've provided some input with respect to the infrastructure gap going forward. So as part of their redevelopment plan, I know that that is something they're considering and will continue talking to the city about. So absolutely something to, we'll continue having conversations on.
And perhaps our staff could comment on Councillor Van Holst's suggestion to add that component. I would like to hear from that before I would consider seconding it.
Through the chair, thank you. So what we specifically put as more of the guiding principles was really to guide whether we could even consider going forward. So if in some cases here, there are things that we obviously cannot sell for various reasons, this kind of flushed out whether there was even an opportunity. So certainly the next part is if there is an opportunity, if there are revenue opportunities. So we can certainly add that as part of our guiding principles as we flush this out to start with that lens to look at what we're looking at going forward. So I think we use this more to really get a good handle on the things that we could do nothing with because there are constraints in place, but certainly a revenue opportunity is something that forms part of the business case as to whether or not you'd wish to move forward.
At this point, I'm going to ask Councillor Van Holst to write out or send to the clerk the language that you would like to have included so that we can take a look at it.
Thank you. And of course, my intent with this is not necessarily generating revenue from a sale, but that the asset has the possibility of being used to generate an ongoing revenue.
Okay, that language is up there. It's been moved by Councillor Van Holst, and I'll just look to see if there's a seconder. Okay, discussion on that amendment to the guiding principles. Don't see any. Let's open the vote.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, let's return to clause 3 now as it's been amended. A mover and a seconder for that. And to see if there's any other discussion. No? Okay. Okay, the vote's open.
Motion carries 6-0.
Let's deal with the 5 and 6. I seem to recall that Councillor Van Holst had a question about 5. So let's get them up together.
No, sorry, I had about 4 and 6 were my concerns.
Okay, let's get a mover and a seconder for those, and then we'll get questions from Councillor Van Holst. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. My question through you to our staff is regarding the trade agreements that might limit some of the things we could do with respect to helping our local businesses sell to the city. What kind of constraints are there? What kind of trouble could we get into depending on the actions we took? People often ask me, are you staying out of trouble? And I think, darn it, I am. But maybe there's an opportunity here.
Ms. Barbone.
I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Freeman, who actually has a great knowledge of the legislation and all the things that we're trying to ensure that we abide by under our city's procurement policy.
Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, through the chair. There are several trade agreements that are in effect that we must comply by, as noted in our report. So first and foremost, there's one between the province of Ontario and the province of Quebec. There is also one nationally, which is the Canadian Free Trade Agreement. It was formerly the Agreement on Internal Trade. It was updated this past July of 2017. And starting in September of this year, on the 17th, the Canadian-European Trade Agreement has come into force as well. So in addition to our procurement of goods and services policy, which is council approved, where we specifically note in section 21.5 that we will not locally or geographically preference any suppliers or bidders, these other trade agreements follow very much the same type of language. In fact, on the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services website for the province of Ontario, they specifically state under their procurement policies and trade agreements that to ensure Ontario vendors have equal access to opportunities outside Ontario, the Ontario government does not apply any local preferences in its procurements. So generally, it's a practice of trying to avoid protectionism. We're very open and competitive and transparent in our procurement policies here at the city, and I think throughout the nation here in Canada. So generally, it is not a practice that I would recommend that we follow. We certainly have opportunities in request for proposal documents to consider other things to be evaluated. I certainly wouldn't suggest that we put local preferencing in there, but we can also add things like bona fide on-time service response times from vendors or suppliers that may indicate that they may want to have a presence here in the local London area.
Just need your mic, Mr. Brown.
Thank you very much, and if I can follow up, by giving local preference, does this mean we're not allowed to advertise locally? So I think we could certainly promote the the RFPs and the possibilities here on a local fashion a little more easily than we could abroad, but are we prevented from doing that kind of thing as well as a preference? Or is the preference only in the actual choosing of the successful candidate?
Through the chair, that's exactly correct. The preference would be if we were specifically biasing or choosing a particular bidder or supplier or giving them some type of preference over others, creating an unfair procurement process. We certainly do our very best to abide by these trade agreements. In fact, with CETA now in effect, there's new rules at certain thresholds, dollar thresholds, that we must give certain time notifications to the European Union countries that have signed CETA, which there's 28 countries that have signed. So that is essentially 40 days, calendar days in the street for a procurement bid opportunity in order to give them time to respond or consider if they'd like to respond to that particular procurement invitation. So if anything, we're becoming more open and more transparent through these trade agreements and creating a more level playing field.
Thank you. What I would like to see us doing for the purposes of the local economy is not only making it very well known that when we've got the possibility for a local company to apply, but to also, since we're linked up in this more global sort of procurement system, is help them in other ways, since we know what we have to do to make it possible for global companies to bid here. We should really be trying to help our local businesses compete elsewhere as well, and looking for those. I don't know what opportunities we have there. I know the Chamber of Commerce has done some good work in holding some roundtables about having people, having businesses export. But of course, this is very good for the local economy. Anytime somebody's bringing money from outside into London, our economy grows. So I don't know what opportunities are there for us to educate and help our local businesses, but if they are there, I think that would be a great thing for us to do.
Okay, the recommendation in the report is to receive the report for information. It's been moved and seconded. Are there questions about 5 or 6, both being moved together? Okay, I have one from the chair about 6. The brochure that's been developed, It seems like a good idea, and I'm wondering, I imagine it's being distributed through purchasing. Is it also being distributed through, Service London Business, through some of our economic development partners who would be interacting with businesses that are getting started up and might not know much about the city's procurement process?
Through the chair, we have given copies to Service London, so it is available through that group. We also have it on our city website, on our purchasing and supply homepage, available in digital format. We have it at all 4 of our locations throughout the city, through our supply services group and our procurement services group. So we're doing our very best to, distribute it as much as we possibly can. We also had a doing business with all levels of government workshop here in London in early November with the federal government and the provincial government, and we distributed copies there to everybody that attended as well.
So just a suggestion, and I don't think it needs to be a motion, but is to maybe consider distributing it to the Small Business Center and Tech Alliance and LEDC, people who are interacting with businesses already, as a way of broadening the reach of that. And I think some of those businesses are going to be interested in the city as a customer, and the sooner they find out about our procurement process, the better probably. So let's pass that on for. Okay, I don't see any other speakers. Oh, except for Councillor Zaifman. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick comment on number 5, just because it's not really pointed out exactly in the recommendation itself, but just so people are clear, $50,000 of the project is now going to be going to lighting of the Harris Park itself versus what was going to be expansion of the parking area, because that's not possible. So just want to make sure that was pointed out there. And also just glad to see another report highlighting some of the great projects we had. I know the mayor and myself and Councillor Van Holst were out at the opening of the new trail in Westminster Pond, so that's very exciting to see.
Okay, we'll open up the vote.
Motion carries 6-0.
And that brings us to item number 4, crowd control procedures at meetings. I think it was Councillor Morgan who pulled this one. Go ahead.
Yes, I did. Thank you, Chair. So I have a couple of questions about this one. First off, I appreciate the report and that this is coming back to us. My concern relates around the provisions to lock the doors to City Hall. And it's outlined in a few areas, and then it indicates that the chair will be informed when the doors are open or unlocked. However, it doesn't mention anything about whether or not the meeting should be proceeding at that time. When I went back and reviewed the Ombudsman's recommendations on this, they determined that, by no intention of the mayor or council that because the door was locked, we failed to, effectively, we were preventing members of the public from freely entering and observing a government in process. Consequently, large portions of the June 10th meeting were closed to the public and contrary to the Municipal Act. So seems to me the Ombudsman has determined that if the doors are locked, it's a closed meeting, despite the fact that it's being broadcast on the internet. And in the recommendations, they basically say we need to, basically find a way to have a security protocol. We have to make sure that we meet our obligations under the Act. So I'm wondering, what happens if the doors are locked? Is the meeting to be suspended at that point? Or because it's not really clear in this particular policy. I certainly like the idea of making sure the chair knows exactly right away, but I'm wondering, is there something in here that we need to do related to that component or not?
I think I would, through the chair, I would refer it back to the chair of the meeting to determine if they feel the meeting should continue or they should take a break. At that point in time, it would be based on what's happening within the circumstance. It would be a very exceptional circumstance, I would say, in the first place. In my 20 years here, almost 20 years, it's only ever happened once. So I don't anticipate this would be something that would happen on a regular basis, but I would refer to the chair's decision and support whatever decision they make at the time.
Then, and I don't know if this is for the clerk or for Mr. O'Brien, certainly, I support that if that's what the report says, that's the direction. My concern is that it puts an obligation on the chair that other members of the committee or council, depending on when it is, may have some input on, given what our interpretation may be of the ombudsman's recommendations. And I know that it only happened once, but basically this is all stemming from that one time. So I wonder, is it appropriate for us to have in our council procedure bylaw something related to informing other council members, that the chair would be obligated to inform the other members of the committee that such a thing has occurred, so that they could also weigh in on whether a meeting should continue or not, or whether it should be something in here? Because it would be of my opinion that if I'm a member of a committee, the chair can be informed, but I would certainly want to know as well, because I may have an opinion on whether or not that meeting should continue, if the doors are locked or not, and not leave it just in the hands of the chair of the meeting, despite the fact that the chair is responsible for the meeting.
I'm not sure that's really a question for Mr. O'Brien. Is there somebody else on staff who wants to weigh in on that? It sounds like, we could give a direction to staff to come back with an amendment to the council procedure bylaw. That's really how we want to govern ourselves in the meetings. I don't know if the clerk wants to weigh in or.
Through Mr. Chair, yes, that's what I would suggest. And we may want to, the committee may want to refer this back as well, so that we can cross-reference between what we're doing with the council procedure bylaw and this policy. But yes, definitely would, something like that would be best spoken to in the council procedure bylaw.
So the report is to be received for information. I'm not sure about referring it back, since we've kind of received it for information, but I do think it's open to us to bring forward things to committee at any time, including now, if you want to make an amendment. I did see Mr. Cox had putting his hand up, and I just want to go to him briefly.
I think it would be, through the chair, it would be fair to, this is an administrative SOP that supports the indication, as the clerks that advised. The procedure bylaw would be the place to make those changes. In the event that there's any requirement to change this further, we're happy to do that at that time. In the meantime, we'd like to have a working document to continue to work from. So that, for your consideration.
Councilor Morgan.
So certainly I respect and support that. I think receiving the report, allowing it to be received by this committee, it's the principles under which the administration is operating now. And I think that if, as I do, feel that the chair should inform members of the committee when they are informed of the doors being locked to City Hall, that can be dealt with through the council procedure bylaw, and I can raise it at governance working group, which has lots of stuff to do, so.
Sounds great. Any other questions about number 4? Okay, let's open up the vote. We need a seconder first. There we go.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, that brings us to item number 7. These amendments to the council procedure bylaw, speaking of. We're starting a little bit behind schedule, but let's get a motion up to open the public participation meeting. Let's look to our staff to see if there's anything they want to say about the report, which we have and have all read.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have nothing to add. It's a pretty straightforward amendment as a result of legislation, and we will be reporting in 2018 with the proposed changes that have to come in effect in 2019.
Okay, I'll look to committee. Once we get the PPM open, we'll see if the members of the public have any questions. At this point, if there are any technical questions about any of these changes, it would be helpful to ask them before the public weigh in. Just questions. Yeah, Councilor Morgan.
Sure, I don't anticipate that we'll have an answer to this, but it's probably important for the public to know if there is one. Under number 2, definition of a meeting, it still gives a relatively vague section B, which is members discuss or otherwise deal with any matter in any way that materially advances the business or decision-making of council, local board, or committee. Was there any clarification in the legislation on what materially advances the business of or decision-making of. I don't anticipate there is, but I know other provinces have much clearer definitions, and I don't know if ours had any context to it or not.
Ms. Smout?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That is a definition that comes from the legislation. It was encoded into the Municipal Act as a part of the Bill 68 amendments. It codifies the common law test that was adopted through a number of cases that dealt with closed meetings long before the Ombudsman's jurisdiction was introduced in 2008. And that is the test at common law. It's a determination of facts as to what would materially advance or move the matter along.
Okay, I'll just look to the gallery to see if there's anyone who'd like to weigh in on the changes to the council procedure bylaw. Okay, I'm not seeing any. I'll just ask a second time. Nope. Third time. Okay. So a motion to close the public participation meeting. Okay, let's open the vote on that.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay. I see Councillor Van Holst, Councillor Morgan, Councillor Zafman. Great.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to add a motion to this, that we have staff prepare a policy to allow our council members to enter the council debates remotely. So that was, I think they're looking for direction on that item. And if that's the case, I'd like us to provide that today.
Okay, let's, it looks like you might have provided language to the clerk, which is very helpful. Thank you. And we'll get that up on the screen and see if there's a seconder. Looks like there is with Councillor Morgan.
I can't second your things if you don't give me the mic. So I have a couple comments, and then I will say I'm supportive of Councillor Van Holst's direction to get information back on how we could actually achieve that. Having councillors be able to participate remotely, I sit on other boards where that's allowed. In some cases they can vote, in some cases they can't, but they're certainly, as members of those organizations, able to participate remotely, and I think that that's probably appropriate to allow in cases where it's possible, but obviously we'd need information back to know how that would be possible. On the report in general, in the first section about the increased scope for being able to go into closed session, obviously this will provide some advantages to the municipality and its partners to be able to talk about things that perhaps in the past we weren't able to talk about, say sub-organizations investigating mergers and that sort of things, or shareholder organizations. There's lots of examples where I think that that's going to be beneficial, but I wonder, do we have any sort of role in telling our partner organizations about the new scopes and how they would actually approach or engage with us on these items in camera, or will that all be done through civic administration? So I guess that's my first question. And maybe I'll just leave it at that. I'll get the answer to that question.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if the question is whether we would go to an outside board or a commission to educate them about, we normally wouldn't proactively do that, but certainly I do get calls from boards and commissions asking for some procedural advice. If you would like us to go out and speak to them about that, about the changes, be happy to do that.
I just think it's valuable, given that both of our clerks and our legal team have assessed the legislation and provided a report to us and understand it quite well, that we would be a great asset to our boards and commissions partners to give them, to offer some guidance if they have any questions about it. I know some organizations have the capacity with their own legal areas to have done this. Others are smaller and may not have. And so in this case, there may be some value for us in assisting where they'd like to, especially with the organizations that we may potentially be engaging with in this capacity. So I don't really know if you want a direction or not. I I just hope that that's something that we would normally offer out to our boards and commissions partners. I will say very positively, on number 2, I like that we've already gotten ahead of the curve on that and taken care of our obligations. So, you know, kudos to our staff and council for making sure that we've met, you know, that threshold of informing the public on ombudsman investigations well before we were required to.
I have Councillor Zaifman. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And specifically, I was actually going to speak to the item that's been brought forward. I guess there's a motion on the floor if someone's going to make it or not. But specifically regarding the ability now for members of council to participate remotely in a meeting by an electronic means. I thought a little about this before the meeting, and frankly, I don't know if this is really a route that we need to pursue. You know, I've been on a number of boards and committees that have members that are made up of a large geographic area, and I think in those opportunities, it makes a lot of sense to do that. But frankly, I think the logistics of trying to have a counselor be electronically a part of a meeting where there's the rest of the meeting going on simultaneously, I think can make for a bit more headaches than it could for help. And so frankly, I don't want to see us move ahead with this at this time.
If I could just ask the mover and the seconder to back out. The clerk's is working on the language there, and everyone's quite eager, but it jumped the gun a little bit. Other speakers, specifically on this direction to have the clerk come back with a policy around allowing electronic participation. Deputy Mayor Huber.
So, very interesting, and I can appreciate perhaps the desire for a member of council who's away from London on council business, or there's a critical vote that they might want to actually vote. That isn't contemplated in this, I don't believe, at all. But I actually feel that there's really a significant question to ask in terms of this term of council. Is this on our strategic plan? And I don't believe that this is on our strategic plan or on the work plan of, I guess it would be legal and clerks primarily, but probably more on clerks. And we've asked them to do a number of significant things going forward into 2018 in terms of the anticipation, not the least of which is the election with ranked ballots and education and engagement and all that sort of thing. So if this committee chooses, I'm not going to support this at this time. I think it would be better left for contemplation under the strategic plan for the next term of council, and maybe let a couple of other municipalities break the ice on this and see how it goes for them. But I would share some of Councillor Zaifman's concerns on it from a logistical point of view. But even if I agreed with it, I would have to say our strategic plan is in place. Let's execute on what's already on the plan and not add another thing at this time.
Other speakers. Mayor Brown.
Thanks very much, Chair. I think one of the most difficult things to do when we're setting priorities is decide what not to focus on. And I think that this is an opportunity that we need to let go by, and an opportunity perhaps for a future council, but we've got a lot of work to do over the course of the next several months, and so I won't be supporting this. I'd want to take a very serious look at something like this before moving this direction, because this is our seat of government. This is in some ways tradition versus technology. Technology would certainly allow a member of council enter into a debate. I'm not sure if they'd catch the nuances of the arguments. I'm not sure if it would lead to great decision making. And so I think it's a big question we need to ask ourselves, but not at this time.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much. So with respect to this term, I'll point out that, you know, we've had members away because of injuries, sickness, loss of family members, and, you know, other family emergencies, away at events supporting the city. And so there's been times, I know, when people wish they would have had the opportunity to speak, or at least say some points that might have been pertinent to this. So I think there's some value in this as well. However, the deputy mayor's argument is great. And so I think at that point, I know that we've got a lot to do, and I didn't think this would be a great deal of work to come up with something like this, but it may well be. So I think in that light, even though there seemed to be an opportunity for operational flexibility, as I guess you could call it, for council, when it comes to our strategic plan, this is not something that's on there. And so unless Councillor Morgan really wants to push forward this, I think it's a very great point that's been made, and we should just let the clerks continue their work with the. We'll let the clerks continue their work with the ranked ballot elections and all the other things we've given them to do, and pass this on to the next council. So I'll perhaps look forward to moving it then. Thanks.
Okay, so it sounds like it's not being moved unless Councillor Morgan wants to make a go of it by himself with perhaps no seconder. Go ahead.
Yes, I would be willing to take a go of it by myself, but with no seconder, it's not going to go anywhere. I do think that this relates to components of our strategic plan. I certainly respect the arguments that my colleagues are making about may not be the trickiest thing to figure out. I just saw value in, and still see value in, finding out what it would take to actually make possible. I think there are circumstances where colleagues could participate remotely and provide some context on important decision-making. I myself have only missed 2 meetings, once to have a baby, once to go on vacation with my parents who retired. So I'm not sure I would be accessing this a lot, but I have sat on boards and commissions where very valuable contributions have been made from members remotely. And I saw value in those in this time, and so I see value in my colleagues' perspectives having that opportunity when they're away. I don't anticipate it would be used often. I think that, quite frankly, if people were away a lot and only using it as a means of not showing up at a meeting, they might probably get criticized by the public. So I would expect that it would be used in those circumstances where it is an important debate and colleagues want to participate remotely. So I'm not sure if it's, if it doesn't pass now, I certainly think it can be raised by the next term of council, but I think it's worth getting at least some information back to see how it would be possible.
Since there's a lot of discussion around the timing, I think it's perhaps wise to check in with our staff and say, if you were to receive this direction, when would you expect to report back to committee?
Through Mr. Chair, I think rather than it being a policy, I think it would be an amendment to the council procedure bylaw. And I do owe committee a more comprehensive report on amendments to the procedural bylaw that's going through the governance working group. So I'm going to say March, April of next year.
Okay, so it's been moved by Councillor Morgan and seconded by Councillor Van Holst. Go ahead, Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much. So I said I would withdraw that unless Councillor Morgan wanted to move ahead. He did, so I'm seconding this. It might be worth bringing it forward to council just for a dialogue. I will point out that this could be very simple. I mean, it could be as simple as recording a statement and forwarding that to the clerk, so it could be played up on the screen, and we could hear what a councillor had to say about a certain thing that might fulfill that and be really easy. So if all this is getting what would be necessary, the necessary steps are required to allow council members to print in the meetings. This may be a smaller task that's not doesn't involve a full-blown policy, and if it seems like it's not onerous, it might be worth us finding this out. So just report on the possibility of a report might be a way to go, because if we can.
Councillor Van Holst?
Yeah. So
I'm
there we
sensing
are.
that the committee would like to vote on the issue. Okay.
Motion loses on a tie vote.
Okay, on item number 7, any other discussion? Okay, let's move the staff recommendation, get it seconded. Oh, Deputy Mayor Hubert, go ahead.
I just want to say how pleased I am actually with the new reasons for going in camera, because we've had a number of sticky wickets on a number of fronts where we've where particularly corporations and other organizations don't seem to share the same rights as individuals and before the Municipal Act. So I think this is a positive move. And I think the new definition of meeting is also very helpful. And I must also just draw attention to a very critical word. It's a 3-letter word, that a quorum of members is present and the members discuss or otherwise deal with any matter that would be moving the materially the decision-making or business of the council forward. The "and" is a very critical word. It's not just that there's 3 of us in a room or something like that, but we're actually talking about something significant and substantial. So I think this is really good work, and I'm very pleased to see it move forward.
Councillor Van Holst?
Thank you very much. And through you, question to our staff, maybe our legal department, where it says, as Councillor, or as Deputy Mayor Hubert suggested, doesn't materially move something forward. What do we mean by materially?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I said earlier, it comes from the case law, 2 cases that were heard long before the Ombudsman's expanded jurisdiction in 2008. And the courts will look at that in terms of, they'll determine it based on the facts of the situation. They will look at what was discussed, what the issue was, the extent of the discussion. The Ombudsman has done the same thing in some of this ombudsman and the previous ombudsmans in their reports, but they look at it on a spectrum in the decision-making process, and so it's really a question of fact. It's hard to say exactly how that would apply in every situation, but suffice it to say, if there's a discussion about something within the council's jurisdiction, something that might be on their agenda or on their work plan, and there's a discussion about it in terms of firming up some kind of consensus one way or another. Usually that gets you into trouble. That's, it's difficult for me to say otherwise because it is a question of fact.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And sorry if that question has already been asked.
Okay, I don't see any other speakers. Let's open up the vote.
Motion carries 6-0.
That brings us to the tax adjustment agenda, which is not to be heard until 1 o'clock. We're running a little bit behind that schedule. We do need to open a public meeting on this one. So if anyone who wants to weigh in on the tax adjustment agenda has the opportunity to do that, to take a motion to do that.
Councillor Van Holst. Motion carries 6-0.
We have the report from our staff here. I see Mr. Edmonds is in the back, which is great. If there are any questions about the tax adjustment agenda, I'm sure he can answer them. Just looking in the gallery to see if anyone wants to weigh in on the tax adjustment agenda. No? Okay. That's the second time. Anyone want to jump in? No? third time. Okay, let's have a motion to close the public meeting.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, we have a motion up on the screen. Let's get a mover and seconder for that. Any questions or discussion about that? Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much. Just looking through here, there's a number of errors made, maybe about $80,000, a little more than $80,000 worth of errors. I'm just wondering how do we make an error? How does that come about? And is there a balancing number of errors on the other side that we've gone out and collected?
Yes, through the chair. The gross and manifest error that you see listed on the agenda, those are items that are factual or clerical errors. Now, when we talk about factual error, we're talking about MPAC had maybe the wrong square footage on the property, they had the incorrect effective date for a supplementary assessment, or those type of things. But the other key thing to remember is that under Section 358 of the Municipal Act, which is the other section that deals with tax adjustments, all applications are gross and manifest errors because they were made in the years prior to the current tax year. So a demolition in 2017 would be considered as a demolition on the report. If that demolition happened in 16 or 15, that would be considered a gross and manifest error because Section 358 requires MPAC to confirm that there was an error made on the return of the assessment roll.
Okay, thank you very much.
Deputy Mayor Hubert.
And anyone who's dealt with impact on any of these issues will know that speed is glacial. And so it takes often time for the information to catch up. And to quote one English writer who said, "To err is human, to forgive is divine," and hence we're here today.
Okay, I don't have any other speakers, so I'll open the vote.
Motion carries 6-0.
That brings us to item number 9. This is a letter from Councillor Ridley about request to cover campaign expenses for her re-election campaign for the Ontario Good Roads Association Board of Directors. I see Councillor Morgan. Go ahead.
Yes, I'd be happy to move this. It's not just a motion for her campaign expenses, but if successful, that we would reimburse her for travel. I know OGRA covers a lot of that, so it's very minimal. I think Councillor Ridley has served us well on this organization, and I would move the motion and wish her best of luck in her election campaign.
I see Councillor Van Holst.
Thanks. I want to say that not only has Councillor Ridley served us well, I think she's served Ontario well on this board.
Any other speakers? Okay, let's open the vote.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, colleagues, what I'd like to do at this point, recognizing that perhaps item number 10, we might have a fairly long discussion about it, is deal with 11 and 12. And if we have to do any kind of rank balloting, we could allow our staff to be tabulating and so forth while we're talking about number 10. How does that strike the committee?
I need to declare a pecuniary interest on item number 12. As I have a working relationship with one of the applicants, which is why we're here today. So I'll declare on 12 if you don't mind.
Okay, I saw everybody else nodding, so that's, I think, what we'll do. So let's move on to 11. This is a straightforward one person for one vacancy. I imagine there's not going to be a ranked ballot. Let's open the vote on that.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, that brings us to item number 12. It looks like we need one member at large and one person with a disability. That's what it says on the agenda. Just confirming that, yeah, okay. I see Councillor Van Holst and Councillor Morgan putting their name or hands forward. I would suggest we have two separate ranked ballots since we're filling two different pieces, and we might want to go first with the person who has a disability, which is what we did last time we dealt with this, and then second for the member at large. Many of the people are willing to do both, so. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Though we may, I'm happy to do a ranked ballot. As I look at the applicants, I see just a tremendous amount of experience here. And I would like to see all of them on our Accessibility Advisory Committee. And there may be a way to do that. I was speaking with the secretary of the committee, and there is also some unfilled spots for the non-voting members. And there's, for instance, one representative from the employment sector, which could be filled by one of the applicants here, representative from housing and development sector, one from the healthcare or wellness practitioner. So there's room for these people to serve if they would like. I'd also note that in the non-voting members are a number of groups that are supposed to be represented, but don't generally send someone. And I wonder if we can't either change the terms of reference to remove them if they don't plan to participate, or put someone in their stead until they decide to. But that's I think that's a direction I would like to go, and we could probably accommodate most, if not all, of these applicants.
So I'm going to suggest that you bring that up under other business or bring it separately to committee at a later date. Seems like a perfectly reasonable thing to talk about, but we're dealing with the appointments for these two specific things that people have indicated they're interested in doing. I have no idea if anyone's interested in being a non-voting member in any of these other roles, and I think we should talk to them before we do anything actionable on that front. I think it's a very reasonable idea, and I look forward to talking about it in the future.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we have a ballot distributed for the two candidates who qualify as person with a disability. So let's rank those people. Okay, perhaps while that's being tabulated, we could start on the rankings and nominations for the other position, the member at large. I think we should find very soon who's still in the pool, so we could probably add them in. So we have 5 candidates for 1 vacancy. And I wonder, colleagues, would you like to nominate candidates first or just deal with all 5 of them? I see someone saying all 5, other people with no opinion. Okay, so we're going to do all 5. I think the clerk has the results.
Through Mr. Chair, based on the votes, the number 1 candidate is Katie Schmidt.
Okay, so we have a motion to appoint Katie Schmidt, and then we'll roll Guy Astrid Smith into the candidates for member at large. And perhaps we can have a ballot circulated there with a strikeout Katie Schmidt if that ballot's already pre-printed. Been moved and seconded. Let's open the vote.
Motion carries 5 with 1 recuse.
Okay, let's have that ballot distributed for the remaining 5 candidates. Okay, colleagues, may I take a motion to just table this item while the clerks do some tabulation, and we'll move on to item number 10. I see Councillor Van Holst has moved that. Seconder. We're just tabling this item. Councillor Morgan. Great. Do you want to see that on this one? Okay, let's get moved and seconded. Opening the vote on that.
Motion carries 5-0.
Brings us to item number 10. Councillor Van Holst's submission suggesting we send the scheduling of meetings to Governance Working Group for discussion. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And through you, I think this would be a great discussion. Something that I don't think we've looked at yet. Although we had, I think about a year ago, Deputy Mayor Hubert had talked about changing things up a bit. But I see some advantages to conducting our meetings during the daytime. I'll let my colleagues comment on it as well. I have a few ideas, but I can share them a little later. Maybe I just tell you one is that I was at a meeting till after 11 last night, and up at our early breakfast morning meeting today. So that's hard. That's sort of hard on an individual, and I think the decisions might be better if we kept more regular hours.
Okay, in the interest of clarifying where the discussion is going, I'm going to get a motion up from Councillor Van Holst to see if there's a seconder for it, and then we'll get into discussion. I have Councillor Zafman next on the speakers list.
Mr. Chair, do you want me to wait until the motion's up?
Yes, I'd like to make sure there's a seconder before we continue talking about it. Yep.
Okay, well, thank you. And maybe if I need to say a few things to encourage in a seconder. So my hope is that we have the conversation at the governance working group to see if this is a good idea or not. I think some of the advantages are that we won't have staff staying up late I think that there's, since we don't generally have a lot of people attending the meetings in the evenings, or not a lot of people here, there might be possibilities, if they were held during the day, for many of our students to come and visit while we're here. I think there might be financial implications worth looking at, and those are some of the reasons that I'd like to have a discussion like this. And I think in the end, it might move us towards and a full-time council, or at least a council being a day job where people know that they can expect to find us here. So there's a few more comments. I've moved that motion. Looking for a second.
Anyone second the idea of sending that to governance working group for discussion? Okay, if not, I'm going to second it. I have Councillor Zafman, Deputy Mayor Hubert. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't generally have a problem with the idea of changing of meeting times or deliberations on meeting times going to governance working group. I guess just as long as the specifics aren't included in there. I mean, I just want to keep it flexible. I appreciate the councilor's suggestions of those times, but I don't know if those times would be best or other times might be best. So if it can just be kept a little clean of that, I'd be fine with governance working group considering that, because certainly there are challenges of trying to find times which are best for meetings, both for the public and for council to accommodate as well, and staff.
I have Deputy Mayor Hubert, and then I'm going to come to Councillor Van Holst. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't be supporting this. We had a discussion about this almost about a year ago this time, and this council spoke very clearly. I don't remember the exact vote, but I think it was something like 14-1 or 13-2 or something to that effect, against really changing the structure of council and how it operates. And this essentially is a structural change to how council operates in terms of times of meetings and who can or cannot participate, because you would basically have to be available on a throughout the daytime. So the other thing is council has also spoken with respect to compensation for the next term of council. So both of those things are decided matters. And so I don't think this motion is appropriate. The governance working group, if the councillor wants to bring it forward at that time and add it to their agenda, so be it. I don't see this as, once again, something that would be enacted for the 18-22 council, but something that could be looked at for the 22-26 council.
Other speakers? Councillor Morgan.
So I appreciate that the councillor wants to change the way we do things, but I have a bit of an order of operations issue with this. I think I've said this a couple of times, where if part of the goal is to increase participation from the gallery, then the first step is to engage with people who are those who are likely to engage, like the public. And I think if we want to consider changing the dates and times, the first step would be to set the next council up with a possible survey from Londoners. Maybe we can add it to the regular survey that we do to find out what they're looking for in accessing their city council. I don't know if the times are fine. I don't know if the times work or don't work for members of the public. That's not a question that I can answer. I think that would come before any sort of discussion on potentially changing the dates. I don't think the governance working group is necessarily the right place to land that. I think we could just have our staff survey the public in some sort of way and find out if that's a change we want to make. I know we've engaged in that to a certain degree. Councillor Ridley, I believe, brought forward the idea of childcare being available for members of the public. I think that's a larger discussion about accessibility of City Hall, and to answer that, we need to find out what the public thinks about accessing City Hall. I just don't want to discuss this at governance working group before we would have that particular information. But we could potentially think about setting the next council up with that information so that they could decide whether there's a better way for the public to access committee meetings and city meetings. So I think that would be the better approach than this one.
Any other speakers? Mayor Brown.
Thank you. I think we don't need to get into a prolonged debate about this today. Councillor Van Holst has just brought an idea forward he wants to send to governance working group for them to, and let me just read the motion, investigate and report back. And I think that's where this discussion is most appropriately held. If they want to do a survey, they can do a survey. If they want to engage with the public in another way, then they can do that. But I think that this is simply going from a standing committee to, to another committee to take a look. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this other than I recognize as I look around the room, a lot of these faces were around this horseshoe until after 11 p.m. last night, and then back at work for a full day's work. A lot of the faces that I see out here on the staff side also. And the question I think the governance working group will be asking themselves, is that really sustainable for the 11th largest city in Canada? And I think it's a very important discussion to be had.
All right, I don't have any other speakers. Councillor Van Holst.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to respond to Councillor Zafman's comment. And yes, by all means, this was just a starting point for a conversation. So it's not, I'm not necessarily hoping that these are the times and I would vote against other times. It's just a way to start a conversation, like one of those party games you have, talk about this. And I appreciate the mayor's comments as well. Again, the goal is to discuss this and see if something comes out of it. And I think this is the proper way to do that. I believe that the governance working group is tasked from this committee and from council, and less often we just bring things up there. But I could be wrong, but I think this was the proper channel to follow to request that conversation.
I think Councillor Morgan and then Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Yes, so I want a clarification because there is something that I will support and there's something that I won't. So what I would support is something less restrictive than what Councillor Van Holst has suggested. His language in his letter is very specific for the governance working group to investigate and report back on the implications of changing these councils to blah, 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 for meetings to be held on Tuesday and Wednesdays as follows. So that is not having an open discussion. And in the recommendation on the screen, it says, as proposed by Councillor Van Holst. So if you want to soften the language up to have a more broad-based discussion on how we do this, that I would support going to governance working group. But I'm not going to support only tasking governance working group with exactly what Councillor Van Holst has worded in his letter, because that is very restrictive and I'm not interested in passing that specifically.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. The clerk's going to make a change to that effect in the motion. I think that there's not going to be opposition from Councillor Van Holst unless I hear otherwise. Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Simply to the mover through you, Mr. Chair, is his intent that this would be implemented for 2018? Because that's his first statement in his, or second sentence in the, it says for the next term of council, I'm proposing, and it's very, very prescriptive, and so that's why I won't support it, but I'd like to know if that's his intent. And then if it isn't his intent, is this the most critical thing for us to deal with in the next 6 months?
Thank you very much. That is my intent. And I must say I'm disappointed in myself for not supporting your motion a year ago, but I thought we were a month away from getting a report back from the compensation committee and that there would be time for these kinds of discussions. Actually, I had hoped to move something like this at the very beginning, but had a seconder that backed out. And so I really do want to have these suggestions. I think there's time for us to do that, do this. We could do this for the next council. However, again, my letter to council was much less prescriptive than the wording, so I'm happy to back that out. Let's just have a discussion about daytime meetings. Here's what a daytime meeting might look like, and,
Councillor Van Holst, the language has been changed.
Great.
And I think, I'm sensing from the committee, we'd like to move on to the voting. I don't have any other speakers.
okay, that seems great to me.
Okay, let's get that moved and seconded. And we'll open the vote.
Motion carries 5-1.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. Let's return to item number 12 and see what the clerk has for us in terms of results of the ranked ballot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Based on the vote, the successful candidate is Wendy Lau.
Would anyone like to see the various rounds? Or are you content to see that printed in the agenda for council? I'm primarily looking at Councillor Morgan.
I actually do like to see the individual rounds.
Is this round one? Round two? Round three? Round four?
Okay, let's get a motion up to appoint Wendy Lau. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Let's open the vote.
Motion carries 5 with 1 recuse.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. That takes us to the end of the public agenda other than deferred matters, additional business. I'm just looking to see if there is some. Councillor Van Holst?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move that we communicate with the members who weren't selected, or the applicants that weren't selected for the Accessibility Advisory Committee, and poll them to see if they'd be interested in participating as non-voting members. And then,
Let's just check with the clerk to see if there's a need for a motion or if that's just something that they can do already.
We can certainly do that by way of investigation to see if there's an interest. We'd also want to check and cross-check whether or not they would qualify to fulfill those roles. We can report back on history in terms of some of those non-voting resource members. If some of them have been vacant for a period of time, we will bring that to your attention and let you know whether or not you may want to consider whether or not that's an appropriate organization to be represented.
I'm satisfied with that, and I think it'd be very helpful.
Great. Okay, I don't see any other additional business. So we need to go into closed session. We have 6 items on the agenda. The reasons are printed there. The 6th item wasn't added, and so I just draw the member of the public's attention to that and the reason for that. I don't think I'm going to read them all out since they're all there on the agenda. We could be some considerable time. We're going to committee room 3. And so I take a motion to go into closed session now. Open the vote on that.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, see you in committee room 3. for members of the public and the media, we'll probably be adjourning from Committee Room 3, so